Hi friends, this is Vema Reddy. Today we will see what is OAuth 2 and how OAuth 2 work with OAuth 2 with Dell Boomi. Okay, I have taken the Twitter API for utilizing as OAuth 2 setup. So first we will try to understand like what is OAuth 2 and how OAuth 2 will be working. See, OAuth2 is basically, there are many things available OAuth2 providers. Like you can see, like Google's also have similar setup, but concept is same, like OAuth2, right? So OAuth2 is basically an authorization framework. It becomes now the standardized version. Earlier we have OAuth2, OAuth1 is there, like 2.0 is the next version of this one. So it's OAuth2 is basically open authorization. O stands for open, auth stands for authorization. So this is a standardized authorization framework to allow applications to allow some applications uh, accessing some of the restricted resource which are provided by the resource server. So for example, now we as your app, okay, for example, now consider your app becomes Boomi. Okay, from Boomi you wanted to access some of the Twitter endpoints because you consider your app as a web app and Twitter as a another application. So from the Boomi you are trying to access the Twitter as a uh, Twitter endpoints are secured. Twitter endpoints are secured. So this is called, we call it as a resources, or endpoints also we can call resources. We wanted to access these resources, Twitter resources. Oh, in order to access these Twitter resources, OAuth2 is the protocols that's been provided by the Twitter. So that's been utilized by the Twitter. So what this OAuth2 basically tells, right? So on behalf of our user, because Twitter, like for example, if I log in into Twitter, I can able to post it. Okay, but same API for posting wanted to do on behalf of your application, on behalf of a user, your application wanted to do. For example, on behalf of me, Boomi wanted to connect to Twitter and post and tweet. So behalf of my me, Twitter is Boomi is going to connect to the Twitter and making a post through programmatic approach. So it means on behalf of me, Boomi is going to get an access to the Twitter API, and then Twitter with that Twitter once get an access, the Twitter able to call that endpoint. So in order to do that, there is a two-step level of authentication need to do. The first thing is OAuth2, there is a different types of grant types are there. Now grant types, like if you just do it OAuth2 grant type, there are different use cases are there. There are different use cases are there. You can see grant types have authorization code, client credentials, and refresh token and password grant, all these things. The whole intention of this OAuth2 is it's kind of delegating, like it won't exchange your physical username and password. Actual username passwords, it won't be exchanged. For example, if I want to connect to Twitter, right? So my actual username and password will not be exchanged, will not be used anywhere in Boomi. It will not store anywhere. It will just give a delegation to the when it will prompt me to authenticate to the Twitter, and once I give him a consent, then the Twitter will authenticate whatever the username and password will be validated against the Twitter, and then Twitter will give a kind of an access code. So if you see this one, right, once I log in into Boomi, I'll show you the how we can do it from Boomi. But this is the first we'll try to understand the flow. As I'm a user, right, I log in into the Boomi. From this Boomi, I wanted to connect to the Twitter. So in order to connect to the Twitter, first thing is when you wanted to generate a button, okay, when you click on generate button on the Boomi or any of your source application, it eventually generates a kind of authorization URL. Okay, it eventually generates an authorization URL. This authorization URL, it redirected to the Twitter website. From that Twitter website, it will prompt you to log in with your actual username and password. But that username password you entered will be validated against the Twitter server. So once you enter, right, so you can see present authorization dialog. So Twitter will give you the authorization. Once you click on authorization, what happens is it will just give you the authentication code, authorization code. So that is the code, as it tells that it's kind of user has given a consent. So that code, with that code, we'll be able to get a token. So you can see once the authorized or denied. Okay, if we are authorized, what it is redirecting? It is redirecting back to whoever is initiated. For example, if I initiated from Bhumi, if that authorization code will be given it to here. With this authorization code is a kind of a consent the user has given for some no for some particular server. So once that consent is given, then what it will do, it will initiate a token. What does it basically mean? Token is kind of an a data which specifies an encoded format which gives a access, which give access to a restricted resource for certain number of time that's configurable. Once the access code you got it, right, once you got access code, with that access code you make actual endpoints. So similarly him here, your app, you initiate user, and then it requests a token first here. It connect to Google server if you're using Google Gmail, anything, if you want to access it, any Google Sheet or something. It initiate, authenticate, and it makes you to consent. Once you consent, you approved, it will return to the authorization code. How does it know it need to return to the same app? Because as part of this request URL, there will be a callback URL will be mentioned. So as soon as it returns, it knows where it should route it back. That callback URL, once authorization code is received, then it exchanges the token to the Google server. Google server will validate, and then it gives the token response. The token response has the token. With that token, it makes any of the restricted calls, any of the resources endpoints. With the token, we pass it as an input in the header saying that this is authorization. Once it makes any call to the any of these restricted endpoints, it takes the token, it validates the token. If the token is valid, our token has sufficient access for the accessing the resource, and once if everything is good, then it returns the data. Okay, so this is a high level OAuth 2. The flow that I'm explaining was authorization 2. Here it could be a Google Auth server, here it could be OAuth 2, Twitter one, or it could be Okta, like any kind of server you can build, implement it. Because the reason I took a Google is if you want to use, there is a way Google console, you can log in and you can set up all these things. Here also Twitter also have one kind of app where you can do all these kind of setup is there. Okay, first we'll show you all these step by steps information in a while. So then we will see how we can utilize these things. First, we'll try to understand what kind of authorization URL it is forming, what the token is basically meant, all these things, right? So there is a developer portal. So if you see this one, it has explained all these things. So if you just go to this one, how does it behaves actually? So the first thing is at this step, okay, when it is preparing authorization URL, this is the kind of URL it forms. Okay, this forms tells that, okay, response type, I'm expecting the response type as authorization code here, because once it send request, it expecting the response as authorization code. That's why it's telling response code. Client ID. Client ID will be given when you create an server kind of credential setup on Twitter and developer portal, you will get a client ID and client secret. That becomes kind of act as a username and password. With that username, it's not username password typically. It behaves kind of username password. This client ID and client secret you can use to get the token. With that token, you will be able to consume any of the API. So now you can see the client ID. After the client ID telling redirect URI, where you want to, once this is going and connect, right? Twitter need to return the token. To which endpoint it need to return the token is that also it mentioning here, redirect URI. And after that scope, as part of this authentication, what level of objects, how many objects you want to touch, like what object, for each object what you want to do. For example, if you see here, I wanted to go for tweet read, user read, and follow read. Means only I want to read the tweets, only read the user information, and follows the redirection, and some kind of follow, Twitter follow-ups can be read and write. So the state will tell you, and the state information it can be sent any kind of generic information. The same state will be and code challenge method. Okay, these kind of things, how you want to send this information back. Okay, challenge method is plain. Once this URL is accessed in a new tab, it will present you to authenticate with Twitter app. So once Twitter asks you to enter username and password, once you enter username and password, then you will see URL, it sees like this. Okay, it returned to that URL will be changing to this one, state will be state, and code, this is the authorization code will return. Once this authorization code return, with this authorization code, this is the step what you will get it here. Once authorization code is received, then with this authorization code, the client ID and client secret, it makes one more time call to get the access token. So that step is going to perform here. So this is the authentication token. This is post call. With this, the authorization code that we got it in the first step will be passing here, and the grant type we are sending as authorization code. The authorization code value will be here. Client ID and redirect URL will be, again, it knows where to redirect the, because the redirect is the one where it has to give the token token response. So that's where it, and code verifier is challenge. It means once it sends to the server, once it sends to the server, it returns back the same thing. So this value will be verified. If this doesn't match, it won't give the success token response. Once this is done, you will get access token. Okay, once access token is there, you send that access token as an authorization header here, and then you make actual API calls. That's the step of here. Okay, so this is the information you wanted to understand about OAuth2 authorization flow. Okay, so with this, we will create, in the next video, we will see how we can set up these credentials and how we can utilize these things from the Boomi. Okay, thank you for watching this video.